There is a berry that grows across the northern latitudes of this planet, from the coast of Finland to the mountains of Tibet to the riverbanks of Saskatchewan. And ounce for ounce, it contains anywhere from 10 to 30 times more vitamin C than an orange. In some tested varieties, the concentration reaches levels so extreme that a small handful of these berries delivers what would take an entire crate of Florida citrus to match. It has been documented in pharmacological texts for over 1,000 years. It was used to sustain armies. It was studied by Soviet scientists with wartime urgency. And yet, if you walk into any grocery store in America today, you will almost certainly not find it. Not in the produce section, not in the frozen aisle, not even in the supplement aisle in most cases. The berry is called sea buckthorn, and the story of why it disappeared from the American food landscape is not a story about nutrition. It is a story about industry, economics, and the careful engineering of what an entire nation was taught to eat. The Latin name is Hippophae rhamnoides. The first part of that name comes from ancient Greek, hippo meaning horse, phaos meaning to shine. The ancient Greeks noticed that horses fed the leaves and fruit of this plant developed unusually glossy coats and appeared to recover faster from exhaustion and illness. That observation was not casual folklore. It was recorded. It was repeated across multiple sources. It was practiced deliberately by people who depended on working animals for survival. The plant appears in classical texts, in Tibetan medical manuscripts dating back to the 8th century, and in traditional Mongolian remedies used across the steppe for generations before any Western scientist catalogued a single vitamin. There are credible historical accounts suggesting that the armies of Genghis Khan carried sea buckthorn as a field ration, not for its caloric value, which is modest, but for recovery, for endurance, for keeping soldiers and horses functional across vast distances with minimal supply infrastructure. This was not a marginal plant. It was a strategic one. By the time European botanical science began to formalize in the 18th and 19th centuries, sea buckthorn was already well established across Scandinavia, Russia, and Central Asia. It grew wild in sandy soils, along coastlines, on eroded hillsides where almost nothing else would take root. And it did something that very few fruit-bearing plants can do. It fixed nitrogen directly into the soil through a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in its root system. That means it did not deplete the ground it grew in. It restored it. Farmers in Finland and Sweden understood this intuitively, long before anyone used the word nitrogen. They planted sea buckthorn along field borders and degraded land not just for its fruit, but because the earth around it became more fertile over time. In Russia, the plant eventually became part of formal agricultural and scientific planning. Soviet researchers in the 1940s and 50s conducted extensive biochemical studies and were genuinely stunned by what they measured. The vitamin C concentration in certain cultivars exceeded anything previously documented in a temperate climate fruit. But the berries also contained something almost unheard of in the plant kingdom: omega-7 fatty acids, a rare lipid profile typically associated with a very small number of marine and tropical sources. On top of that, the fruit carried significant levels of vitamin E, carotenoids, flavonoids, and over 190 individually identified bioactive compounds in a single species. The Soviet Union did not treat this as a botanical curiosity. They treated it as a national asset. Sea buckthorn oil was used in military field hospitals to treat burns, including radiation burns. It was included in the supply kits issued to cosmonauts. Soviet medical literature from this period contains dozens of formal studies on its wound healing, anti-inflammatory, and mucosal recovery properties. The Russian word for the berry, oblepika, became an ordinary household word, as common as the word apple is in English. To this day, sea buckthorn juice is sold on ordinary grocery shelves across Russia, Finland, Sweden, Germany, and China. China alone now cultivates over 3 million acres of the plant, and has built an entire commercial processing sector around it, producing oils, supplements, beverages, and skincare lines exported around the world. So the question is not whether this berry works. The science has been settled for decades in multiple countries. The question is why the United States never adopted it. And the answer begins in Florida. In the early 20th century, the American citrus industry underwent a massive and deliberate transformation. What had been a regional crop became a national commodity, backed by organized grower cooperatives, federal marketing orders, and some of the most aggressive agricultural advertising campaigns in American history. The Florida Citrus Commission, later supported and reinforced by the USDA, launched sustained public messaging across radio, print, and eventually television that firmly planted one idea in the minds of American consumers. Vitamin C comes from oranges. That connection was not scientific in origin, it was commercial. Oranges are a perfectly acceptable source of vitamin C. No one disputes that. But the campaign was never designed to share the full picture of what was available. It was designed to own the category entirely, and it worked beyond anything its architects could have predicted. By the 1950s, the association between oranges and vitamin C was so deeply embedded in American culture that it functioned almost as biological fact in the public imagination. School nutrition posters reinforced it. Doctors repeated it without thinking. Government food pyramids codified it. The orange became the symbol, and everything outside of that symbol quietly fell away. Sea buckthorn never had a lobby. It never had a marketing board. It never had a commodity chain with refrigerated railcars and interstate distribution contracts and nationally branded juice cartons sitting in every cooler in every convenience store. It was a wild plant, and wild plants do not generate the kind of concentrated economic return that justifies building industrial infrastructure from scratch. The berries are small, they cling tightly to thorny branches and resist easy picking. They are extremely difficult to harvest mechanically without damaging the fruit, and once picked, they begin to degrade quickly, far faster than citrus, which was bred over centuries for exactly the opposite trait. Every single one of those characteristics made sea buckthorn economically inconvenient for the American food system, which by mid-century was optimizing relentlessly and exclusively for shelf life, transportability, visual uniformity, and continental scale. But there is a harder truth beneath all of that. A crop that fixes its own nitrogen, grows on marginal land without irrigation, requires no pesticide regimen, and produces fruit with a nutrient density that dwarfs commodity crops is not a product. The industrial agricultural model is designed to reward. It is the opposite. It is a direct threat to the input economy that American agriculture depends on. If a plant rebuilds soil on its own, you do not sell synthetic fertilizer. If it resists drought and frost down to -40 degrees, you do not sell irrigation systems or crop insurance against weather loss. If its fruit replaces the functional need for a half-dozen separate supplements, the supplement industry does not benefit. Sea buckthorn is not a failure of nature. It is a failure of economic incentive alignment. After the Second World War, the United States made a series of structural food system decisions that favored centralized production, long-distance supply chains, and a narrow band of heavily subsidized commodity crops. Corn, soy, wheat, citrus, rice. These became the pillars that the entire economy of American eating was built on, and anything that did not fit within that architecture was not explicitly banned or restricted. It was simply never included. Sea buckthorn was not suppressed through any coordinated conspiracy. It was suppressed through the far more effective mechanism of total omission. It was left out of USDA planting guides, left out of agricultural extension service recommendations to farmers, left out of nutritional education curricula, left out of the cultural vocabulary of American food entirely. And over the course of 2 full generations, that absence became completely invisible. You cannot demand access to something you were never taught existed in the first place. Meanwhile, the Nordic countries quietly continued what they had always done. In Finland, sea buckthorn is used in juices, jams, sauces, and high-end skincare products. In Sweden, it appears in fine restaurants and humble rural kitchens alike. In Norway, it grows along fjord coastlines, where the soil is thin and the winters are punishing. These are not fringe health communities chasing trends. These are nations with some of the longest life expectancies, lowest chronic disease rates, and most respected public health systems on Earth. They did not forget this berry. They simply never needed a corporation to tell them it mattered. Today, a single bottle of high-quality sea buckthorn oil retails for $30 to $60 in the United States, almost always imported from Europe or China. A small bag of dried berries, if you can even locate them, costs more per ounce than high-end specialty dried fruit. That markup exists precisely because there is no domestic supply chain. Americans are paying premium international import prices for a plant that grows wild across large stretches of Canada and the northern United States. It thrives in Montana. It thrives in both Dakotas. It thrives in Minnesota, Michigan, Maine, and Alaska. It has been growing on this continent, in some areas for over a century, originally introduced for erosion control and prairie windbreaks by agencies that apparently never considered its nutritional value worth mentioning to the public. That silence is beginning to crack, slowly. A small number of independent farms across the northern plains and the Pacific Northwest have begun cultivating sea buckthorn with commercial intent. University extension programs in a handful of states have started publishing introductory guidance. But the scale remains microscopic compared to the potential, and public awareness remains close to non-existent. Here is what matters for anyone listening to this who is thinking seriously about food costs, nutritional independence, or long-term household resilience. A single sea buckthorn plant, once established, produces fruit reliably for 20 to 30 years. It tolerates winter cold that would kill most fruit trees outright. It tolerates sandy, degraded, neglected soil. It tolerates drought conditions once its roots are set. It requires none of the chemical input cycles that define and inflate the cost of modern American agriculture. And its fruit delivers a density of essential nutrients that would cost you meaningfully more to replicate through store-bought supplements and year-round imported citrus. It is not a miracle. It is a plant. But it is a plant shaped by thousands of years of evolution to thrive in exactly the conditions that the modern agricultural economy considers low value and unworthy of attention. The fact that most Americans have never heard its name is not an accident of geography or climate. It is a direct outcome of economic architecture. The food system you grew up inside was never designed to show you everything that grows. It was designed to show you everything that sells within the system already built. And there is a vast and consequential difference between those two things that most people are never once encouraged to question. The berry exists. It has always existed. The only thing that was ever truly erased was your awareness of it.